Louis Riel is a well-known name all around Manitoba and in some other parts of Canada. He is regarded as the son of the Red River and the father of Manitoba. But what some people forget is that Louis Riel can also be labeled as the mastermind behind two of the largest and most successful rebellions in Canada. To understand the Red River Rebellion, we need to first understand the early life of Louis Riel. Louis Riel was born on October 22, 1844, and the oldest of 11 children born to Louis Riel Sr. and Julie Lagimodière. The Riel family was considered a well-respected family. Louis Riel was 1/8 Aboriginal and 7/8 French. Riel Sr. organized a group to support Guillaume Sayre in 1849. Sayre challenged the HBC monopoly, which caused him to be imprisoned, but the Riel Sr. and his group fought for Sayre's freedom, which led to his release and the end of the HBC monopoly. Louis Riel's mother was of white descent, and her parents are thought to be one of the first white families to settle in the area. Riel Sr. was also regarded as the leader of the Métis, as they had very strong family ties. The Riel family were devout Catholics, and Louis Riel was being educated by Catholic priests in the Saint Boniface area. At age 13, he came to the attention of Alexandre Taché, a bishop promoting priesthood to talented Métis boys. So in 1858, Taché arranged for him to attend the Petit Séminaire in Collège de Montréal. At this school, it is said that Riel was good with languages, philosophy, and science, but he was really moody and unpredictable. When his father died in 1865, Riel lost interest in priesthood and left the college in March 1865. He continued his studies with the Grey Nuns for a year, but was kicked out because of his behavior breaches. He then worked as a law clerk at the Montreal office of Rodolphe Laflamme. Riel signed a marriage contract to be wed to Marie-Julie Garneau, but her family didn't want her to be involved with the Métis, so their engagement ended. Riel also got bored with law and is said to have been traveling here and there for a bit, and then returning home on July 26, 1868. In April of 1869, the HBC reached a deal with the Canadian and British governments to transfer Rupert's Land to the control of the Dominion of Canada. This made many Métis people who were living in Rupert's Land very worried. Many families did not have their farms recorded in the HBC's land register, and at no point were they consulted with during the negotiations. What would happen to them? William McDougall, Minister of Public Works for the Dominion of Canada, was quick to take action after the agreement for the transfer wrapped up. He sent a survey team to Red River to establish boundary markers for new plots of land for the immigrants who would soon be coming to Western Canada. This survey team went to work even though Canada did not have possession of the land for another 6 months. Tensions began to rise as soon as the survey team arrived, as they trespassed on farms and did not tell people what they were doing. To make things worse, the survey team only spoke English and had trouble communicating with the French and Michif-speaking residents of the area. On October 11, 1869, André Nault, a farmer at Red River and a cousin of Louis Riel, tried to stop the surveyors from working on his land. The surveyors ignored him, so his neighbors and Louis Riel stepped in. Riel was bilingual, so he was able to effectively communicate with the surveyors. The group of neighbors stopped the surveyors by standing on their surveyors' chains and clearly declaring the Dominion of Canada had no right to survey the land in Red River without permission from the residents. This first small act of rebellion sparked the rest of the Métis community to take action and fight for their rights. On October 19, 1869, the Métis people of Red River formed the Comité National des Métis, in which Louis Riel served as secretary. The Comité wrote a letter to William McDougall stating that they had the right to be informed about any policies affecting their land and to be part of any negotiations between the HBC and the Dominion of Canada. They also wrote that Canadian delegates had no right to enter Red River without the permission of the Comité. However, McDougall ignored the letter and he tried to enter Red River with a party of armed officials. They were met by a party of Métis people who were very serious about the terms that they had written in their letter. They were not going to let McDougall into the Red River. The Métis told the Canadians that until they had to finish negotiations with the Métis, only the residents of Red River could decide who was in political control. McDougall was then escorted back over the American border. Around 2 months later, the Comité formed a provisional government at Red River. Riel was the president. The provisional government was formed in order to keep the peace in the area, as there were still tensions between the Métis and other groups living in the area who were anti-French and anti-Catholic. The Métis were not willing to acknowledge any Canadian authority until their rights were guaranteed. In February 1870, the Red River community formally elected representatives to make up a new provisional government consisting of 20 French speakers and 20 English speakers to begin negotiations with the Canadian government. Again, Riel was the president, and he would soon have to make some important decisions. The provisional government came up with a list of rights for the people of Red River, but support for these rights were not unanimous. Those who were followers of John Schultz, or Orangemen, refused to acknowledge the provisional government, and they made plans to overthrow it. The result of their plans was the death of 2 men, one a passerby and one a Métis. Tensions were rising very quickly, and it was not safe for many Métis people anymore. Shortly after, on February 19th, a group of Schultz supporters attempted to overthrow Upper Fort Garry, and they were arrested. Among them was Thomas Scott, a man who made his anti-French and anti-Catholic views very clear. He was tried in court and found guilty of treason and was sentenced to death. On March 4, 1870, he was executed. Louis Riel was seen by many as the man responsible for the killing of Thomas Scott and was seen as a villain by most people living in Ontario. However, those living in Quebec saw him as a hero who stood up for Catholicism and the French culture. The differing opinions in Canada drove the divide between Ontario and Quebec even deeper. The result of all the conflict? The negotiations between Red River and the Dominion of Canada continued, and the Canadian government passed the Manitoba Bill in May of 1870. Soon after, the Manitoba Act was approved, and Manitoba would soon become its own province. Riel's hard work in Red River was a victory for the Métis people, who were granted many of the rights they fought for. It is quoted as today that Louis Riel was the father of Manitoba, although not everybody agrees on whether he should be celebrated as a hero to his people or shamed as a traitor to Canada. After Manitoba's becoming of a province, Riel was bribed by the government to remain in exile in the United States, although that only lasted for 4 months. Upon his return, he was encouraged by his friends and supporters to join federal politics. He was voted into the House of Commons, although he was expelled before he could claim his seat. Once again, he was sent into exile. Shortly after, he was admitted by his friends into a mental asylum in Montreal, as he believed that he was a prophet sent by God. After being released, he went back to Montana, got married, and became a teacher. He peacefully stayed in Montana for some time, until he was summoned back to Canada by Gabriel Dumont. The Métis community in Saskatchewan needed his help with negotiating their rights with the government. At a meeting, they proposed to take up arms and drafted a Bill of Rights. The federal government then decided to send troops to address the issue. In response, the Métis created a provisional government, Riel was the president, and seized the parish church and demanded the surrender of Fort Carleton. The fighting lasted for 2 months, and although the Métis won a few battles, the Canadians finally won, and Riel turned himself in. He was tried and charged for high treason. On November 16, 1885, he was hanged. His body was brought back to his hometown of Saint Boniface, where he was buried. At the time, he was seen as a villain, but we know now that he was a hero.